Starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is Mike Moscato from Blanchard Systems, and welcome to one of our monthly webinars. Of course, I got the last page up there. I've got the completely wrong keynote in here, running twist. Let's see if I can open the right one. I'm definitely off to a hot start here. No, I don't want to make a new one. No, that's what happens when you have everything raring to go. Here we go. Archiving. I think that's what we're going to go over. Look at that. What we're going to try to cover today is the new archiving feature in ES5. And some of the things we'll try to go over. Actually, before we get to that, if you've got your webinar settings here and you have trouble seeing the full screen or it doesn't scale as you want, as always, we try to remind people that you got a little button in the upper left-hand corner, I think it is, to scale to your screen so it'll fit properly. You should have a questions box in your little GoToWebinar panel there. So if you got any questions you want to pop in, because we can't hear you, hopefully you can hear us. We could answer those questions at the end. So put them in the old control panel there. We're going to try to go over today is, first of all, we'll take a quick look at the Archiware utility, which is the actual archiving package that ES is using to do archiving. We'll look at the basic configuration in ES because it's not real difficult, so it won't take us too long to go over it. And look at the archive and restore steps that are used to do this. We'll go through how to manually do some archiving and restoring, and we'll also look at how to automate the full routine from within ES. And as you'll see when we go through it, there's actually a couple ways to do it, but hopefully we'll strike on something that looks useful to you.
Hey, Mike, I think we lost your screen share there.
Okay, let's see. Okay, do you see me now?
Yep, I can see you now.
Okay. Well, hopefully that'll behave. Let's put that away. Just yell at me if it goes away again. Before we actually jump into ES and show the archiving workflows and how to configure it, first we're just going to take a very quick tour of the Archiware utility. We're not going to dive too deep into it, but it's kind of useful to know the beast that we're working with and how it works and how it behaves. And one thing I'll point out is that I think I've always considered myself over the years to be a fairly, what's the right word, stupid person when it comes to archiving. And what I found working with Archiware is it's pretty user-friendly to set up and administer. And, as someone who really had never worked with it until about a week and a half ago, I think it's been fairly easy to get up and running with it and be able to put things together to work as needed. The other thing I'll point out is that with any archiving solution like this, it's pretty common that you're going to, at least if you're in a decent enterprise setup, you're probably going to have some tape jukeboxes and tape backup. I certainly don't have one here. So the setup you'll see me working with today is one in which all of the archiving and backup is just done to disk, which is an option in here, but obviously I'm not going to be running around watching my tapes load and having a party doing that. Archiware has 4 basic utilities that it can run. These 4 modules are basically all configurable in that, or let's put it another way, they're separate. So that if you decided, I'm going to use this with ES, but the only thing I really need to do is do archiving, because that's the piece ES works with, that's really all you would have to purchase. You wouldn't need to use any of these other 3 options you see sitting around on the top. Since ES interacts with the archive portion, we'll kind of look at that first and maybe look at that in the most detail. And again, we won't get into, doing a full training session on it. One thing you'll see in all of these little utilities, archiving, you'll see this thing called an archive plan. Backup, you'll see something called a backup plan. Synchronize, same thing, synchronize plan. Backup to go is something that works a little differently, so you don't see one of these little plan things there, but we can live with that. As far as how things are getting archived and where they're going, initially I went into this storage manager guy and actually created volumes that is really just some space on my disk, on my server running the archiving. So basically, I'm just archiving and backing up to disk. The archive plan is probably what we want to concern ourselves with the mostly, because this is where we kind of tell it what to do and how to do it. So we have an archive plan. This is called for ES, and the ES actually does call that when it archives files here. And if we check this index option, this is one that I think hopefully is something we will be able to do some customization with out of ES. The reason I say that is with this default option of original path, the thing to remember, what we're archiving out of ES is really the high-res information. So you're going to get things out of a job that are going to be living in the path symlinks, data, ES, composite, and then those folders that are like D6001005. And those folders, for a normal human being who looks at them, they won't really have any notion right off the bat that which job they may be associated with it. Now, in terms of doing archiving or restoring out of ES, it's not necessary to know that. But you'll see later when we do a full manual restore from a job that's been deleted, you'll see how it would be useful if there was a way that we could configure those other than creating that original path that already exists. You probably hear my cat in the background. I'm just going to keep swatting her away and continue on. This archive options is a pretty important one, and one setting in particular I draw your attention to is this guy right here. After ES initiates an archive request and Archiware carries it out, we're going to tell it to delete the high-res file. We're not going to delete the whole folder because that would just wipe out all the previews as well. Because one thing you'll see is that when we do archives out of ES, we still maintain the previews and the project still exists. So we don't just archive it, delete the file, and wipe out the whole job. We're keeping the previews, and really that's how we do a restore later. The thing I'll point out is that when we archive and it creates the index within Archiware, it'll actually create previews for us as well. So later on, if you're browsing files, if you were trying to do a manual restore, you get a visual cue of what the files look like as opposed to just looking through file names. And this is actually done with ImageMagick. There's some pre-baked scripts that you can get from Archiware, and this one is really running a script using ImageMagick to create the previews for us as they go in. I'm going to go real quick over these other utilities. Synchronize, from everything I've seen, the way it works is pretty much just like an rsync. So it's just a way to completely replicate a file system or do a clone to another machine. Now, as you could probably guess, when I did my testing here, I wasn't really interested in completely cloning my file system off my Linux server, but I did pick one path from my ES server, and this is the ES composite folder, and you can see it's been backing everything up off of that thing for the last several days. The Synchronize, if we look inside here, you can see all the previews that are in there. I think this is a folder where I'd already archived the high res. We don't see any high res in there. If you look at the synchronize plan, synchronize and backup, you will have schedules that you can make on them. So I basically told this one, every 4 hours, do a sync for me. And again, if you've worked with some of the Linux and Unix utilities over the years, you might be familiar with rsync. And everything I've seen to synchronize is pretty much like an rsync. Backup is just that. You can choose a path or multiple paths that you want to intermittently back up so that you have quick access to files that may or may not get deleted, which you'll see here on my backup plan. Is I chose, since my ES server also is a twist server, I went in and told it, I'm going to back up all of my key files for twist, the repository, all my param files, my JDBC drivers, and my ICC profile. So if for some reason any of those things got lost, corrupted, or whatever, I've got them handy and ready to restore. These will do, I've got this one set to run daily, and I'm pretty sure this does incremental backups. Yeah, that's what I've set it to do. Full or incremental, and the synthetic backup is something I've read in the notes. I'm still having a hard time understanding. It basically is, from the way I've read it, it actually creates the backup from previously backed up files. It doesn't actually get them from the file system, but actually gets them from the index that has already been backed up on. Backup to go is a pretty interesting one for setups where you have many users with their own laptops or their own desktop machines, and they too want to be able to back up particular folders or files that live on their machines to the main Archiware server. So if you look here, I actually have 2 workstations that I've got configured with the client utility, and each of these has their own local utility that allows them to configure and back up. So for instance, this is sitting on my laptop here. If I open this guy up, we see that I've got just a simple folder locally with, and I can go ahead and add more folders to that, but I've just got a folder with some pictures in it that I've been backing up. And again, I think I've got this set to go every hour and back up. And just as a quick example of how this stuff works, you know, let's say I'm in here, and let me just make sure this is the 047 file, right? Let's delete it. If I go to restore, notice this is looking at the path I've been backing up, and these are the files that have previously been saved to Archiware. If I tell it to restore that guy, come back to my folder, we should see file 47 show up. There he is. It's pretty quick, and like I said, as someone who's always been a bit clueless with archiving, it's pretty easy to learn. Now that is a very, very quick survey of Archiware. There is a whole lot more in here, but what we want to concentrate on now is how ES integrates with it and can archive, restore, and so forth, and manage files from within ES. First thing you got to do, let's say you got yourself a new ES server, you're running ES5, and you want to get this thing up and running. We'll assume that you've installed the Archiware server. If you go to your admin page, you'll now have a tab that says Archive Tools. The credentials that I put in here are the same credentials that I used when I connected to the server here in my browser that we were working in earlier. Once they're in, you normally want to hit this test button. If I get that, client OK, I know ES is talking to the Archiware server. So once I see that, I'm pretty much in Fat City. So now that I'm talking to it, the question is, how do I get it to do stuff, or how do things work for me? We sign into ES. The first thing we should notice, if we go to our devices, you'll see there's a new plugin in ES, this guy right here. So he's the guy that manages all this for us and allows us to talk back and forth with the server. And it's just like a lot of the other plugins you're familiar with if you work with ES. You know, all the, for instance, eTwist, each workflow is a plugin, digital delivery plugins. These are all just capabilities that the JDF controller is able to declare. So that now allows us to talk with the Archiware server. Nextly, how do we initiate archiving and restoring? You know, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. And if you look at a document workflow, we have a couple new steps. That's the archive step, which you see I got hanging around in here. And if you're doing a restore workflow, like this guy, you'll see that there's a restore step. Neither of these have any configurable options in them. In fact, the restore one, if you look at that thing that says ignore quota, that's actually referencing a non-existent feature at this point. There was a document put out last year at the Worldwide Technology meeting that showed some of the notions and features of archiving. That quota was one of them, but it does not exist yet in the interface. And as I said, if we look at the archive step, I'm pretty sure he has absolutely nothing. Yeah, so they don't provide much of anything other than I shall archive and I shall restore. So let's look at some approaches to dealing with this from within ES. I'm going to go through like 4 different scenarios. Here's the first one. And again, I think that ES5 and the option for archiving is so new. I think people are maybe playing with different approaches as to how they want to do this. Some they may determine are really not efficient, and they may jump to others. But we might as well see what can be done and what can't. Let's look at this workflow that I've thrown these files in. This is a pretty straightforward workflow. The files come in, they need to be approved, and after they're delivered, they're going to get archived. And so you see what I've done here is I've just built them directly into the document workflow itself. I'm not sure that's necessarily the way to go, but let's kick a couple of these files through. Now you're going to see something happen here. You're going to see it fail. That's always good. It failed on my digital delivery. Well, let's see what's going on with our digital delivery. Oh no, it aborted on the archiving. That's even better. I think this is an archiving demo, isn't it? Let's try this. There's also a user action, so that if you want to manually archive a file, you can do it in that way. Notice that little dot that appeared up there. Whenever you see that dot, you know that files are being archived. When they complete, we're going to see, when this completes, you'll see a little green dot. So any file that you see in here that has the green dot has been archived. Now there are implications for that. I'm going to kick another one of these off. So while that guy is archiving, we're going to look at this file. Because again, although he's been archived, the preview still lives. So if I get into this file and I start zooming up, we can see pretty quickly, okay, this is not the high-res file. What we're looking at is the preview still. There's our guy that just finished. So let's say we want to manually do a restore. There's a user action we created to restore. Action restore. That goes out, queries Archiware. Again, you get the little, I'm not even sure how to describe the color of that icon up there, which tells us that it's in progress. In this case, is bringing it back. And when files have been restored, the little dot will go away completely, as you see there. So now if we double-click that guy, view him again, we can agree that we actually do have the high-res file back again. Now, in a workflow like this, in which we're doing the archiving per file, I'm not sure that in general that's an approach that you're always going to want to take, because I think generally when you're archiving, you want to archive a job when the entire job is completed, and you basically want everything to go. So let's look at another approach to doing this. If you look at these files, these guys have all reached the end of the road in this job. They've all been approved. They've all been delivered. Basically, these boys are done. And you'll notice that within the workflow they're in, there is no archive step in them. So there's no archiving associated with document workflow. If we look at our project workflow, though, you'll notice it's gone through its steps, jobs completed, and it's now got an option here called Release to Archive. So let's look at that milestone, and you get a notion of how we can work with this to basically archive an entire job. If you look at the Release to Archive milestone, it's one of these guys that's set with a timeout value. So the timeout is 10 days. Obviously, it can be whatever you want it to be. But for us, we're basically saying after 10 days, we want this milestone to be completed, and the job is then going to continue. So we say that's fair enough. When he continues, what exactly is he going to do? This is the workflow we were just looking at. When he continues, you'll see there's a program link there. What's he going to do? He's going to set a piece of metadata for our project. Notice job is metadata for a project. There's an archiving metadata set, and I put in a property called Go Archive. Again, it could be anything you want. But when that thing fires, it's going to set that guy to true. So how is that useful to us? It's useful because we're going to work with trigger sets, which is a new feature in ES5. And I've got a trigger here for archiving that says if the project metadata is set for this guy, this Go Archive property, and if that value is set to true, I want to fire off a user action, apply it to all documents in the project, and the user action I'm going to fire is my archiving user action. So we're basically triggering the archiving of the job based on a piece of metadata that gets set in the project workflow. Now, we could sit here and wait 10 days for this thing to go, but I suspect no one's too interested in that. So I'm going to, since this is a step milestone, I have the ability to kick it myself. So let's say okay. Notice the icons changed on all of our guys there. So they're all being archived now. If we're so inclined, we can always go to Archiware, go to the archive piece. You'll notice here where it says it's running. So these are the files that we just told to giddy up and get archived. You've always got these logs up here, so you can either do the job monitor or do the whole history log and see what's cooking. This tells us what we've been doing recently, right? We go back to ES, notice we got greenlit in these guys. Now, if we choose to now, because again, we haven't deleted the project, so this project's sitting around for a while, who knows how long. If we wanted to restore them, again, since I've got this built into the project workflow, and you may have seen this earlier, there's a trigger for restoring as well that basically does the same thing. I've got a restore piece of metadata. If it gets set to true, it's going to run the restore user action. Whoop-de-doo, let's do it. Restore and tell it to go. Again, we should see our little icons there popping in, and these guys are going to all come back for us. One thing I'll point out, and this is really nothing new, but you know, within ES, if you're running user actions on files, they can be monitored with the show workflow in the same way that the full document workflow was that these things came through. So we can still pop in here and see what's going on. This file has obviously come back now for us. And these guys are finishing up, but we don't want to sit here and stare at them all day. There's one other thing we're going to go over, but before I do it, I just wanted to point out that within your system tools, there is this archiving piece that they have in here. The utility of it, frankly, I'm not really thrilled about at this point, because I think it's a pretty bare bones set of information that it gives us. You know, we can, like, you know, it tells us that a file was archived and it's done, and the info, I think, is fairly limited. You know, there's the file name and that it got restored and all that kind of stuff. And if you're so inclined, you can always read the whole JDF output to read through it. But, you know, I'm not sure that what it provides us is necessarily, you know, a lot of really great information for us. It's just as easy to still go into the event log, and you know, you can filter on the archiving step or the restore step if you want. So you can see all that information is also presented in the event log if you need to go back and kind of trace something that you ran. Last thing I want to try, let's say you got a project like this, and notice all of my little green dot icons there. So these guys have been archived previously. This job is finished. So you can see down here that they've been archived. So let's say somebody comes along and they delete the job. Away he goes. Now, if I want to get that job back, there is certainly no facility within ES now to get it, because as you saw before, when I was running the manual restores, it required me to actually go to the project, select the files, and tell it to restore, or as you just saw, I go to the project workflow and tell them to come back. Since the project's gone, how do I get them back in? Now, I've been kind of messing around with an approach to this, and let's see if we can get it to work. First of all, within Archiware, you may have noticed this earlier, there's a restore option up here. As soon as I hit it, if you look at the left-hand column, it's basically asking me, well, what do you want to restore? Do you got a backup you want to restore? Some of that backup to go stuff, or archive? Well, I think we know we want to restore an archive. This is the basic, this is the index that I'm working with right now. And if you look, these are the paths and files that I've backed up previously. If you know the names of the files you're looking for, you can always do a search, right? Now, I'm pretty sure, since I'm actually plan ahead and I'm kind of sneaky, I know where those folders were. This is the previews I was mentioning earlier, so you get a visual look at what's been archived as well. Right? So here's what we want to try to do. These are our high-res files. Want to restore them. But it does us no good to simply restore them into that path, because simply dumping files into that path does not recreate a project in ES. It just dumps a bunch of stuff into the file system. It doesn't do us any good. So I'm going to try something a little more sneaky. I'm going to restore these, but I'm not going to just dump it back into the original folder that they were sitting in. What I want to try is I'm going to throw them, and if you look at the path I'm following, you'll see what I'm up to. This is a workflow that I've got. It's a twist workflow. Oddly enough, it's called re-ingest. I wonder what it does. So I'm going to dump my files into that folder. And again, as I'm sure you're seeing, this is how you do a manual restore out of Archiware. You know, I assume in a real world environment, you know, if we were backed up to tape, it's going to go in and load the tape, get the tapes that it needs, and bring these files in. So what should happen now is those files, and you can see here, this is how you can kind of track what it's doing from within here. It's going to the drive that those files were on, and actually I think it's already done. And if all is well, it's always great when you crash and burn in one of these webinars. Ah, there we go, look at that. My job was recreated. My files are being re-ingested, and it's actually recreating the flat plan for me, and it's also assigning the appropriate project template, document workflow, and project workflow. So you might ask, you know, I must have cheated somehow to do that. And it's kind of a yes and no as to what I did. I'll just show you real quick how we managed to do that. When this workflow completed earlier, there's a little program link here. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to capture 3 key pieces of information that we need: the customer name, the name of the project, and the project template ID number. Once those are captured, we actually write them into the file. So they're inserted as metadata into the file. So the file knows from whence it came. It knows the project, the customer, and the project template that were used. When we call them back from Archiware, from their archive, the twist workflow that we dumped it into reads the metadata from the files that we stuffed into it earlier. It then basically creates a folder structure that ES can read. Once it reads it and picks up the files, it knows how to create the project, it knows where to create it, and it knows which project template to assign to it. So that is a very quick overview of Archiware, ES integration, and some fumbling around with different approaches to working with it. Got any questions for me, Alex?
Yeah, I see 2 questions here. First one is, does Archiware need to be installed on the ES server, or can it be installed on its own separate server?
It can be on its own separate server. The only thing that ES needs to be able to do, as you saw earlier, is be able to connect to it, because it's actually communicating via JDF. I haven't done enough tests yet, but I tend to think it will be faster if it's on the ES server, but it doesn't have to be.
Makes sense. And one more, it's pretty quiet today, but the second one is, does ES have any built-in, and I think you showed a little of this earlier, but does ES have any built-in restore or archive options, or do you need to make your own user action for that?
Well, you either need to make a user action for it or you need to build it into the document workflow itself. However, here's something that I came across the other day, and this is kind of interesting if I could find this. Yeah, right here. These were the tech notes that Dalim passed out at the Worldwide Technology meeting last year. At the time, the way they proposed all this, you'll notice that the archive step in this example actually lives in a project workflow. So the logic being, if the project workflow kicked off that step, it would automatically archive all the files in the project, as opposed to the way I did it with the trigger step, right? But that doesn't exist yet. I quizzed Dalim about it, and it appears that that's a future feature, but it doesn't exist yet. And you know, you'll notice also, this is another proposed feature that they had in here that would exist in a template: archive production files after n number of days. If you look at ES5, you'll see that that option doesn't exist yet either. So you saw the way I kind of got around it was my timeout feature was a milestone instead, as opposed to having a handy-dandy little feature like that would do it. So for now, you're probably best off, at least I think, especially if you want to just archive the whole project, you're better off doing it with a user action. And with ES5, there are pre-baked user actions that you can import. So if you load up the default ES5, you should see this archiving thing here. And if you load him up, it'll give you a couple of pre-built user actions. But you certainly don't need to use those. You can always build your own if you want to.
Sounds good. And yep, that's all we have as far as questions.
Okay. Well, I hope it was useful / helpful. As you know, we have the webinars every month. What is it? The second Wednesday. Is that correct? Is this the second Wednesday of the month? So this is the third Wednesday. So maybe this is an old slide I got. I'll say the third Wednesday because that's what we're doing today. And next month, I'm not sure if we have a topic yet, but stay tuned, and I'm sure we'll come up with something of interest. Thanks for your attendance, and have a good day.